People say I am the best boss. They go, God, we've never worked in a place like this before. And you get the best out of us. I think that pretty much sums it up.
Hi everyone, welcome to Good Boss, Bad Boss. I'm your host, Joey, and today I'm sitting down with my direct report and longtime friend, Tom. This episode is all about conflicts of interest. Can you be friends with your boss? It's a question I've asked myself many times, and a question that I'm a little scared to ask Tom, who I consider a friend. It's gonna be a juicy one, my friend. Let's get started. I'm super excited to have you here with me, Tom.
Thanks.
It's funny because we host another podcast together, but we've never had one just the two of us. So
this is like L&D Plus after dark. L&D Plus with no guests.
We've known each other for a while, but other people listening don't know you. So can you introduce yourself, share a bit of background, mainly geared towards your manager journey.
So I'm Tom Baragwanath, head of content at 360Learning at the moment. You hired me, so thanks for hiring me, Joe. So I mean, I've been
You're
working.
my first hire.
Yeah. We've been working together at 360 now for almost 3 years, and I was freelancing.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's crazy, which is crazy, and I was freelancing for you for 360 and other clients for a little while before that too. And so, I mean, my background in terms of managing at 360, I've been coaching the content team for a year and a half at the moment. And so in terms of previous management experience in New Zealand, I worked in government. I managed a team of consultants at PwC. And before that was acting manager for a while in a team in climate policy at the Ministry for the Environment. And so, I mean, my sort of coaching management experience has been for a few years, but I would definitely not describe myself as any kind of guru, any kind of real authority here. I think, the real value in us sort of chatting about, what it's like to manage people, what it's like to coach people and be friends as well. Because, I mean, as you alluded to, we were friends before we started working together, and hopefully that continues. So,
yeah. I think that we met through a common friend, Patrick.
Yep.
For people who don't know, actually, the Paris startup scene is quite small. So everybody kind of know everyone, especially English speakers in Paris. I think all of the English speaking content marketers are we know all of them, and we have brunch together. So
I feel like you could fit them all.
You
could fit them all in sort of a mid-sized bar, I think.
I mean, when I had to hire somebody to grow our team at 360Learning for the content team, I mean, there were only a handful of people that I know it's good enough for the job. And Tom has been working with me already as a freelancer for a couple of years at 360 and companies before. So I knew that, if he's up for a permanent job, then he would be a great fit. And it's crazy because at that time, I thought I was just gonna hire him and then potentially another person. And then the team just blew up. We very quickly scaled the team from me to you and then Robin, and then we're 15, 17 people right now, and you became manager. So everything just escalated really quickly.
And I think it's sort of a reflection of, there were a couple of years there of just, growth was the name of the game, right? And it's very strange when you think about the modern the context right now, especially with a lot of companies thinking about resizing and layoffs and stuff. It's kind of strange to think about how quickly and how fast the growth of the team was.
Yeah, it was a total 180. It was not do more with less at all. It was
do more with more.
And so you were talking about you have managed other teams before in New Zealand. What was the biggest team you have managed?
So at PwC, I was an associate director there managing. It was a team. It sort of, varied between 6 and 10 members of the team, depending on the project. So I mean, PwC is a big pool of people, and then you grab people for different projects. So you coach a couple of people, but you have a project team that you're actually sort of executing a job on site with a client.
Okay.
And that may be a completely different group of people. So you sort of get this cross pollination of coaching and managing.
Right.
Yeah, but no, so that was really great. Had a really good time doing that, and private consulting, the hours are really crazy, like really crazy, and you get really close because of that. And I think that really influences like what the managing and what the coaching dynamic ends up being, is how much time you all spend together and the pressure cooker sort of thing.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm sure it's a very different scene compared to startups. But anyway, today what we want to talk about is, can you be friends with your boss? And we want to dive into conflicts of interest, different relationships you can have. So first off, I want to start with asking you, how did you feel when I offered you the job?
Yeah.
Like, we already knew each other. We had like some kind of friendship, hopefully.
For
that
sure.
is reciprocal. What did you feel when I asked if you want to like come join the team?
Yeah, I mean, it was first of all like a really great offer, and it was a point in time when I think I needed something sort of a little more solid and stable and dependable than the whole freelancing gig. But I think it was an unusually easy decision for me to make, because we'd already been working, like me being freelancer, you being sort of one of my bigger clients. I could sort of see how you operated, even if like the freelance dynamic is a bit different. I could sort of see how you like to communicate, how you like to provide feedback, which is like characteristically like direct and frank, and which is always great to receive. So no, I think the risks of making a call like that to sort of join your team were like, frankly, really low for me at that point. But there's definitely, because I've been in this situation before where I've worked for friends of mine that they then became my manager, and I've had friends and ended up managing or coaching them too.
Okay.
And it is always a bit of a call where you're like, well, actually, if everything goes belly up at work, you may maybe either have this friendship quite negatively affected, or even lose a friend.
Has that happened already?
No, not to lose a friend for sure.
Okay.
But there are also certain friends, and I'm sure everyone listening to this would relate too. You have friends that you don't ever want to work with. Because they're just, the personalities are not quite right.
And you knew that wouldn't be a good idea before even going into it. Yeah.
No, just wouldn't be good. Wouldn't be a good situation at all. And I'm especially really impressed by like couples that manage to work together as well. Because I often say this to my wife, that I just think it would be a terrible idea if we ever got in the same workplace at all. Because I just don't think that would be a good recipe. But it's always a call where you're balancing, well, what's the trade-offs here? Like if something really goes bad at work, what's going to happen to the friendship? And then also, what are sort of the pre-baked in dynamics of the friendship that are going to impact how you work together as well? Like, are you dealing with a friend of yours who's really sensitive, who is a little bit too caustic in the kind of feedback that they give? So these are all, I think, the big elements of it. But one thing I will say is, I think especially when you're sort of in the formative years of your job, of your career, in your 20s and 30s, this situation ends up happening quite a lot, especially as you described, in markets that are quite sort of insular. I mean, the English-speaking marketing world of Paris, you're almost certainly going to end up working with friends, or like make friends through work, and then continue hopefully those friendships elsewhere.
Exactly.
So, it can be a bit of a minefield, and people probably need a bit of a roadmap for how to deal with this stuff. So
and I think that, first probably want to also separate two possibilities, which is one, working for people that you were already friends with, which is kind of our situation. And then the second case, which is becoming friends with your boss after working together, which is also like a question that we can answer. On like, can you be friends with your boss? And personally, I've never been friends with my bosses, at least not while they were my bosses. Sure. And so like, I'm also someone who is like a little bit terrible with authority, and I don't like to be told what to do. So I often have like a slightly antagonistic relationship with my bosses at times. There are obviously people that I became friends with after a while, after they are not my boss anymore. It's
funny you say that, because you must have been keeping that really well under wraps, because I haven't noticed any elements of like antagonism in the workplace from you. But it's interesting you say that.
No, but like the tricky thing is when there is some kind of power dynamic that, your boss is someone who gets to control a lot of your future, your development. Do you get a raise? Do you get a promotion? Do you get opportunities? And so sometimes when I'm in positions where, I want certain things and my boss won't, or we're not in a position to give it to me, then, there are certain feelings that it's mixed into that affects the relationship or the friendship at times. So, I mean, but now that I'm on the flip side where, now that I'm a boss, I want to be friends with all of my direct reports. So it's so weird.
It is. And I think part of it as well, in speaking sort of in like as a coach / manager, I think it's a question of always just being aware of like what exactly is the fact that you're a coach or someone's manager. How is that impacting the relationship that you've got, especially in all of those little implicit kind of unspoken ways as well, right? So even something as sort of minor as, you might ask someone like, how was your weekend, whatever, that classic Monday morning question. And if someone is a friend of yours, then they'll tell you like, oh, actually, like I just caught the train back from my holiday this morning and I kind of haven't been working this morning. I've been unpacking all that kind of stuff. I mean, of course,
if more transparent.
Yeah. If you're just friends, then you can be real about all that stuff. But if you're someone's coach or manager, you kind of, you notice that people's accounts of what they're up to in their personal lives are a little bit sanitized. And that's completely to be expected, right? It would be odd if that wasn't the case.
I know. So we probably should give people a little bit more context of how our relationship is before getting too much into like how I feel sometimes. I mean, obviously, it's from my point of view, it's worked really well between us. I think a large part of it is thanks to your professionalism, like how to be professional when we need to be, and then you're very good at your job too, so I don't have to, chase after you and like, be like, hey, what's up with that? And so we're able to get the professional, like the work done, and then have space for other more personal or like friendly type of exchanges. And so I think that's why it worked well. And then the fact that there is our culture that helps because of the transparency, because of the way we manage performance, because of the way we have OKRs, systems in place that will make it easy for me to know what's up with everything, and have an easy way to assess whether you're doing your job or not, and also for other people to see, other people like your peers, other managers, execs or leadership, to know that, oh, Tom is doing a good job, he's contributing, he's making an impact. So I don't have to be like, oh, is Joey playing favoritism, or like is she giving like a free pass to Tom or stuff. Like, no, like you can see the things that you're doing and makes it so much easier.
I think you've really hit on something there, because the way like at 360, it sounds like we're both really drinking the Kool-Aid here, but the way we use like transparency and OKRs and stuff, it means that it sort of you're limiting the ability of a manager or a coach to have their own personal little fiefdom where, for example, like I've had previous companies that I've worked for where performance ratings and whether or not someone's considered good at their job or whatever is a little bit of a black box. It's like a horse trading thing that happens between coaches, between managers.
Yeah, it's like whether your manager likes you or not.
But if everything is a little more transparent and the exact reasons for someone's performance rating, the percentage of their targets that they've achieved in a particular period or whatever, if that's all just available for the whole company to see, it kind of explodes that area of bias, and you don't really feel beholden so much to your team members as a coach or a manager, for all of that stuff. Like if someone doesn't get the remuneration or the rewards or whatever that they're looking for, it's not just on you. And that's actually really beneficial for every coach and manager, I think.
Yeah. And every time I'm challenged, like there are receipts. It's well, look here, like this is what is done. And so I think those two things, like you being good at your job and professional, and also like the company culture and the systems in place really helped make it easy for us to both be friends and have this working relationship. Of course, at the same time, I also think about like, what's going on in your head when, I ask to hang out and do things on the weekend.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Do you say yes to come to my birthday party because you don't want me to give you a bad rating?
Well, I don't, so first of all, I think you need to know that like I'm polite, but I'm not that polite. And I also I do care about this job, but I don't care about it that much. Like if I truly didn't want to hang out with you, then, then I just wouldn't job. No, but that's I think you point to some really interesting questions there, which is what kind of degree of frankness, of realness can you expect from your friends when you happen to be coaching them too, right?
Exactly.
And this is what comes back to, there are certain kinds of friendships where if I had the chance to either work for or manage some of my friends, I probably just would make the decision like, no, I'll take another job or, whatever, because that dynamic wouldn't lend itself to that kind of harmonious relationship. And I'm sure everyone hearing this has people in that situation as well. So, but I wanted to ask you a question, which is, so you mentioned earlier, like not ever being sort of like authentic, sort of like true friends with any of your bosses before, and I'm sure that doesn't mean that you didn't like them or like, but do you think that it's because you're maybe compartmentalizing, okay, this is a work relationship with a capital W, and therefore like I need to treat it in such a way that I'm constantly maintaining my future potential promotions and stuff like that? Do you think that's what comes into it? Yeah.
I think that is definitely, that's a big part of it, because I'm always looking for the next step and
sure.
to know like, okay, how can I grow in this role? How can I get like more responsibilities, salary, like all of those things. You're always thinking about how you're being perceived by your manager, and trying to show yourself in the best light possible. So that's, one thing. So it means, as you said, like sometimes maybe your conversations or exchanges are more sanitized and, you filter through it a bit. You're not going to tell, not like I party at all, but like you're not going to tell your manager, oh yeah, I partied until 2 a.m. last night and, I barely slept, that kind of thing. You'll filter through it. So it's just naturally, it's just not the same. You don't talk to your boss the same way you talk to your friend. And then the other side of that, it's like sometimes inevitably there will be scenarios where they ask you to do things that you don't want to do, or you don't agree on certain things. And me being so invested in my job and feeling very like, especially in my earlier time of my career when I was a bit younger and more like, how do you call it, hot-headed, like passionate and
like impulsive
impulsive, or like feeling maybe caring a little bit too much about my job. Sometimes you take things personally, and then when it's not about you, but then I was like 25 and you think it's all about you.
Right.
And then you would just be like, oh, why does he make me do this or that? Like, why is he not giving me this opportunity? So there are more of those like feelings that will affect like how you feel about the person. When you ask for raises and you don't get it, then so there are lots of those frustrations, I think, that will affect, how you are able to build this friendship with my bosses.
So it's almost like if I can distill that, there's an element of transaction that sort of creeps into it, and that's not like I'm not sort of that's not. That's
I would say power dynamic.
Yeah. Okay.
Rather than a transaction, because it's like they have control over what your future for a certain period of time. And so, sometimes
that's really
it's
true.
Not.
It is definitely true. And I think the way people navigate that, it speaks, like that's one of the hardest things I think about being a coach or a manager is, like creating and maintaining those kinds of like functional sort of authentic relationships where you're both acknowledging like, hey, okay, so there is this power imbalance here, right? Like I'm not pretending that I don't have the ability to influence what happens to you in your next role or even in this role. And I think it would be like just very disingenuous not to sort of directly acknowledge that.
Exactly.
Coming back to like why, because I have found, and I'm not just saying this because this is going out to the masses or whatever, Joe, but it's very easy to be coached by you. I mean, you're quite transparent and quite like natural in your management style, and there's not a lot of gossip and trade-offs and all that kind of stuff that comes with your usual workplace. And also because the fact that you knew me before we started working together in this respect, and that sort of like foundation of trust there, where if we have a meeting where I end up getting frustrated about like this thing or that thing or whatever, I know that it's not going to blow everything up. It's gonna be fine.
Like when you're frustrated with like feedback on webinar deck or something.
Oh sure, yeah. Just for example, like no real life example there at all.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I think it's a two-way street. Like I also find you easy to manage, and I think it's just because like we have that trust. We are pretty in sync in how we think and also how we communicate. And so whenever there's something that is like a bit off, I would tell you directly and you would tell me directly. And I tend to not to want things to fester, and I don't like to ignore the elephant in the room. So when I know that, okay, hey, this is like a bit off, let's talk about it. And I think the level of trust that we have means that I feel that I can be transparent with you even when I have to deliver bad news or critical feedback or whatever. I know that you're able to take it, and it won't affect our relationship because I mean, I think the basis of it is that, you have to also be quite good at your job. So then, because like all of that falls apart if like, you're kind of struggling and you're not a good fit for the job and like, it's not working so well. And then, so I think, that's also you being good at it, and I don't have to worry too much about that foundational part of like you getting things done in the right way. Makes everything else a bit easier.
This is turning into like an on-air performance review, so yeah, I appreciate those kind words, Joe, I think.
Okay, no.
I totally agree. It's a absolutely fundamentally different story if you're friends with someone and you happen to be coaching them and they're not performing. Like that's maybe 10 times more challenging to try and navigate, both for you as the coach or the manager and for the person as well. So yeah.
And actually it makes me think of something which is kind of the downside of our relationship working so well, is because you were my first hire at 360 Learning and it worked so well between us, it gave me the idea, which was a very naive idea, that I could have a similar relationship with all of my direct reports and my whole team. So I try to be friends with everyone that I hire. I tell them, which I still believe, like that our relationship comes first and then, work, which is like, you can always count on me. I will have your back. And then, the work comes second. But then now I'm seeing the limit of that, especially as you said, like sometimes there are people that are maybe not performing so well or just not a good fit for the role. And then, because of that relationship I have with them, it's hard for me to, deliver critical feedback or in a way that's enough for them to realize how much in trouble they are.
Well, this I think
makes things more difficult.
I think what you've just pointed to, and the whole idea of as a manager, being sort of putting the relationship individually with each of your direct reports before the wider sort of work context. That's actually, I think, one of the biggest pitfalls of the sort of modern sort of coaching management environment and culture that we have in a lot of companies these days. And so, I mean, this is, I think, a really good example, and one thing that I'm sure a lot of listeners will be having a hard time dealing with is if you were, and we should get in as well to the whole difference between a coach and a manager. Right?
Yes, because at 360 Learning, we call managers coaches. And the whole idea is like you are not a top-down authority figure giving orders to people. You are like, I don't know how we call it actually. Like you're more like a peer-ish person, and you're supporting the team and supporting their growth.
That's it.
With low authority.
Yeah, the idea is supposed to be sort of more about collaboration and sort of nudging people as opposed to like top-down directives.
It's leading without authority.
And I will say, like, it's not limited just to our company, right? This is something that happens in a lot of places. But this whole idea of someone being a coach, like it was sort of more peer-driven, more collaborative, like less about just issuing directives and having people follow them. It's great in some respects, right? You end up with this quite sort of like friendly
theory.
Yeah. But then there are times where you just have to say, I'm making this call, I need you to please do this even if you disagree. And then also one other thing that makes it challenging is when you prioritize that empathy and that sort of human connection before the achievement of like business goals, it means that sometimes you have to communicate and give suggestions to people that they're going to disagree with or that aren't optimal for their like personality or for their interests or their passions, but for the good of the business, for the good of like the ultimate goal of what you were trying to do at work, you need them to do it anyway. And that's one thing that I mean, because I've worked in the more sort of traditional like hierarchical top down, thou shall do blah 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 because I just told you I'm your director, I'm your manager. And actually in a lot of ways that's a little more predictable, because even like, I mean, when I was working in government in New Zealand, even if you thought that what someone was doing in a position of leadership was really silly, you can voice your concerns and you can air all of that dissent or whatever and get it all on the table. But then once the call is made, everyone's just getting on and doing it, even if it negatively affects you personally. And that often happens and you just roll with it, right?
I think it's about the expectations, right? Because in those situations, you're like, oh, this is fucking stupid and I hate it. But then it's the boss, so we're going to do it. Yeah. But like everybody expects that we get orders and we get directives from the top and we execute. But like when we're in this like more startup-y collaborative or like new style leadership type thing where you're not supposed to use your authority too much, and you're supposed to be leading like in a not top-down way and be a coach, then people think, oh, well, you told me that I own my scope and I should be able to do what I want as long as, we hit the goal. And so, why you tell me what to do, or why are you giving me all these orders, or like, I don't agree with what you say. And then, so the expectations is they are owners and they are supposed to not take orders.
Yeah.
So then it becomes a different dynamic, and sometimes it takes longer to get people to the one direction that you want.
And I would say as well, I mean, I would go even further, and maybe I'm just a bit more of a pessimist than you, but I think this idea of the truly flat organization where there's no hierarchy and everyone is fully in charge of their own scope and makes only decisions that they themselves, I think it's just a fallacy. I think it's a lie. I think it's something that people have engineered to make workplaces seem friendlier and more welcoming, but it actually is hindering the ability of some organizations to progress against a shared goal. Because sometimes you do just need someone in a position of leadership to say, hey, everyone, this is what we're going for. This is what we're aiming towards.
Yeah.
There's an element of autonomy and discretion in how you think we should get there. But then even within teams, like I need managers to manage and set, the goal and the strategy for how we're going to get there.
Yeah.
And people can disagree. But if you give people so much scope for autonomy that they can challenge anything anyone says within the company, you can just end up working yourself into stasis, because you just need someone to exercise some classic top-down leadership at some point and just make a call on it, right?
I wonder if it works like to a certain size. So maybe like when you're like 50 people, it's okay, but then when you're 500, it's just not. Yeah. It's just messy.
I'd agree with that.
Like there's a reason why the military is top down, because when there are so many people, you just need hierarchy and you need order and you need efficiency. So maybe. But like, did you prefer when I ask you like, what do you think? Or do you prefer when I tell you like, this is how we're going to do it, Tom? Yeah,
well, I think it's not always so binary. I mean, you can say, hey, so this is what we need to do, and we have a few options. I prefer A or B or C. Yeah. But I'm open to being convinced, right? And this happens a lot where you will say, okay, so we need to work on this series, we need to work on this rebranding, and there's a lot of ways of getting to that end goal. So and this is you sort of speaking, like I'm keen to hear ideas, I'm keen to hear suggestions, and then we sort of shape something up together. Yeah. Right? I think that there being like leaning too hard into one of those options is probably a recipe for disaster, especially but I don't know, like in your experience, I mean, I'm sure before you were managing people, you would have experienced people on both ends of that spectrum, right? Like, did you prefer to just be given a clear directive or be given a lot of latitude?
Well, this is why I mentioned the thing about expectations, because I think when I joined the company and was told about like our convexity culture and how you're an owner and you can, decide what you want for your scope. So I came in with that thinking, and also like I was starting a scope that didn't exist, so I had to create it from scratch. Sure, yeah. So there was like quite a bit of freedom on like, what do we do there? It's like almost like a new situation where I can kind of do what I want. I think my tolerance for like top-down input was much lower in the beginning because I was new and naive and had this like expectation of being a full owner of my scope. And then I think also as we grew the team into bigger, things get more complex and things are more intertwined and less siloed. It also means you just naturally need to have more alignment, and alignment means more like someone driving it from the top. Or
either someone driving it from the top, or miraculously everyone has roughly the same idea on how to get somewhere, right? That's like,
I don't think that has ever
happened, which is very, very rare, right? But even in previous roles, before you were managing people, like, as a sort of individual contributor, like, what was your preference?
I don't like to be told what to do, so I always rebel somehow, and I always like to challenge authority. But in my past jobs, I've often been quite close to the CEO. Or often it's like a CEO founder. So I feel like, that I can take input from the CEO founder because like they own the company and they have a vision and that's what they want to do. And be like, okay, well, I can work with that. But I think it's harder when it's like another layer, because just then sometimes like I start to question, like, is my direct manager aligned with the CEO founder? And like, is there also sometimes like a different agenda or like different interests that is involved that affect like a certain directive? That makes things trickier.
Yeah, it's sometimes hard to realize that.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, I think a nice sort of just open question, and maybe something that that you might not have thought about, is, should someone expect to be friends with their manager? Like, is this even a desirable thing?
It's funny because like I never really wanted to be friends with my managers. But I want my team to be friends with me.
You want them to love you, Joey. Love me. No.
I'm so needy.
I think it's true. It's true. No, and I think that's the classic dynamic, is as a member of a team, you may not feel particularly drawn or particularly like a close affinity with the person managing you. Then you move into a position of leadership yourself, and you do feel this like need for validation. And
it's something I need to unpack with my therapist.
For sure.
But like I definitely know that I have a people pleasing tendency and want to be liked, and those have been obstacles to like me being more, I think, cutthroat when I need to be at certain times, or like cut my losses when somebody's not performing, letting people go sooner rather than later, when I might have dragged things out a bit longer than I should have, just because I felt that I had this relationship with them. I want to defend them, protect them. I at times felt that I had to choose between what's best for the team or like the individual employee versus what's best for the company. And that's where I guess the coach manager conflict comes in, which is when you're a coach, you're supposed to never switch teams. Like you're always on the side of the team and you don't switch sides in the middle of the game. When you're a manager, you kind of like, well, you in the end, you need to do what's best for the company.
That's what I think is one of the biggest drawbacks of this coaching model. I think it's it's an element of being disingenuous about, because coaches do have to make calls that negatively affect their team sometimes. Because there are just certain situations where there's a direct tension between what an individual person wants, what they feel they deserve, and then what the company is willing to give them in terms of recognition, in terms of reward, in terms of promotion, or in terms of what they're working on, right? So there are times where, you have to make decisions that go directly against the interests of individual team members, and just have to explain to them that these are all the factors involved here. And this is why we have to do this anyway. Like, it sucks, but we have to do it anyway.
Yeah.
I think that's always a reality.
Actually, now that I think about it, sometimes coaches do need to like get rid of some players. So maybe it's like you're the coach of the team and not the coach of the individual. Because what I was thinking is like when you're coaching an individual, then you don't give up on them. Like if they're not good enough, then you coach them to up their level until they make it. But like, I guess if you're thinking of like a coach of like a football team, because I'm watching Ted Lasso. So
sure.
I have that in mind. So like sometimes when they're not good, you kick them out and you get new players to come in, and you're still the coach. You're still playing that same side, but you're not. Yeah, I don't know. It's
it's tricky.
A flawed metaphor.
No. But I think it all comes back to the. I think there are some flaws with this idea of people coaching, and I mean I'm sort of repeating myself here, but I think this trend towards more collaborative, kind of peer-driven, like coaching versus management, it kind of elides the fact that if you are in a position of responsibility and authority, like over someone's workload, then it's inherently hierarchical, right? Like it can't all be collaborative. It can't all be, leading through agreement all the time, right? So I think it's just establishing that relationship of trust and showing people that you will tell them the truth. That's the main thing, is giving people all the context and all of the information they need to understand why you're doing what you're doing. And that's one thing that I will say, like, you've always been really good with, is even when you're proposing something at work that I may not like always agree with or whatever, it's always made clear to me like why you're getting there, and you're always willing to unpack your reasoning for it. And there have been times where you and I have disagreed with each other about particular decisions.
That was one of my questions.
Yeah, sure.
How have you ever disagreed with the decision I made as your boss / friend, and how did that impact our relationship?
Yeah, well, there was one decision that we were working on a docuseries, and there was an artistic direction that you were going in that I fundamentally disagreed with in terms of how we were going to tell part of an employee's personal life, like a story about their personal life.
Getting too personal.
Yeah, and I was pretty direct in my statements around how I thought it was the wrong call and stuff. And I remember at the time, you disagreed with what I was saying, but you were really open to listening to me. And then I think we sort of gave it a day and then came back to it, right? And then I think you ended up being a little closer to my thinking on the topic.
I think we came to a compromise.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
But no, and I think, that's one example where if you were any less confident in your abilities and your position as a leader, you would have been like threatened or pissed off or, responded a bit more negatively. But because I think you and I have known each other for a little while and you understand that, like, I can say something really directly and negative to you and the sun's still going to come up tomorrow, right? Like, it's not going to be the end of the world. And I think that's really valuable when you get to that, and it's kind of hard to get to that, right? It takes time to build that up.
And I think that part of it is also how you, like Tom, you choose to use
my political capital.
Yeah, political capital. Okay. Because like you don't push back a lot, or like you don't disagree often with me. So when you do and you make a point to say it, I do think, oh, okay, maybe I should listen to this. Like you probably feel strongly about this and there must be some reason behind. So
well, I think just going back to it, I mean, we're in marketing, like no one dies. So there's I will put my foot down on certain things when I think it's truly wrong, but like, hey, I mean, if we were surgeons, if we were pilots, I would probably be a little more frequent and forceful in my disagreement if I thought we were doing something wrong. But again, like, not to denigrate marketers, but there are many different ways of getting the job done in marketing, right? That's all I'm trying to say.
I think not taking things too seriously also helps, definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
So have you ever felt that you had to choose between being loyal to me as a friend or doing what's best for the company as an employee?
I think honestly, I don't think I've ever sort of been torn between that decision. And I think again it comes down to the fact that if you were any less sort of confident in your abilities or in your position in the company, I maybe would have to tiptoe around things for risk of offending you or whatever. But I think because you have like quite a no BS approach and you're quite open to receiving this kind of feedback, I don't really feel that tension.
So something that I wanted to talk about is also, like, other than you and me, there are other people in the team who are also friends with us before they joined.
Sure. Yeah.
That you now manage. So how have you personally felt that relationship, has been, and how, you have navigated being your friend's manager?
Yeah.
/coach.
Well, it's funny because I mean, before I started coaching the team, I mean, you were coaching the team, right? And so it was you with me and a few other people, and I was sort of like individual contributor alongside these people, and then I became the coach of the team, and then so that was obviously a change in dynamic there, because suddenly you go from
peer to
being someone's peer to coaching them, right? And I think the way I sort of navigated that at first was to be like, I sought a lot of feedback from people and made sure that I knew that I created this relationship where they could be really honest with me about how they felt about that. And if I got the feeling in those early days that someone was really bristling at being coached by me, then I think it would have been really, really tough. But I think, it all worked out because the way I came into it was respecting the autonomy and the abilities of the team to do their job super well and to execute like really well. And also just understanding that when you go through a change like that, you don't all of a sudden put on your coach hat and start like rocking into work and giving directives here and there, and then like, no, that sucks, do that again, like, start being a tyrant. It doesn't really work like that.
Yeah, you need to earn that.
That's it.
Like
That's
not
it.
earn the right to be a tyrant, but more like earn the team's trust and build that.
Like one thing that's always made that easy for me in the current setup that we have. And again, it sounds like I'm just drinking the Kool-Aid, but I truly believe that any member of the team at the moment could also be the coach.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I'm coaching people that that I'm there to like show them the way. It's more like I'm coaching them to support their like what they want to achieve and find the best and most coherent link between what they personally want to achieve and then how that complements our like goals as a business, right? So that yeah, I think this is one example of all of the we've been talking about like the pitfalls of this coaching model versus the management model. In the case of our team, like it actually does work.
And if we hone into like the specific people that you were like closer friends with before becoming manager, did you feel a change in dynamic once you became the coach?
Yeah, I mean, very slightly. It's always going to be, again, because some people are a little more sort of careful in, again, like how they communicate things to someone who's in a position of leadership, right? But yeah, it definitely changes the way I think people sort of relate to you and talk to you. And yeah, it's mostly around, I think everyone assumes that you now have access to like some new echelon of gossip because you're in a coaching position, and it's like, it's actually far more dull and operational.
People tell you less things sometimes.
Yeah, that's true, but because they're always asking, so hey, like what's the real deal with this thing? It's like, man, I don't know if there is some sort of layer of gossip and stuff that exists elsewhere, I'm not aware of it. So yeah.
So since you have already experienced like being managed by a friend or having to manage a friend, have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between being a good friend or being a good boss? How did you handle that conflict of interest?
Yeah. So in a previous role, there was a situation where, you know, a really good friend of mine joined the company that I was working for, and I suddenly became in a position where I had the ability to influence the performance rating that this person was given. And I knew that there were certain things that this person was working through in terms of like their alignment with what like their own personal like working style and what the company expected, right? And I mean, I had to essentially follow the letter of the process in going through the performance review, in giving this person a performance rating that I knew that they weren't going to be happy with. But it ended up being essentially the only option available to me because like the way it worked in this organization was you gather feedback from peers and that informs the performance rating that someone is given. And that feedback was trending in a like not a bad direction, but just not a sort of fireworks from day one kind of direction, right? Okay. And so I knew that this person was going to be disappointed. I knew that it was going to maybe get like a little bit of resentment and bitterness to me, not just in my position like as a manager or whatever, but as a friend. And but it was really the only option available to me. I mean, within the confines and the expectations of the company, it's just what I had to do. And there was definitely a little bit of emotional burden in coming to that decision at the end, but yeah, we sort of got through it. It's not as grave as I'm making it sound, but this is definitely one of those. Are you
still friends?
Yeah, we're still friends. Yeah, definitely. But this is definitely one of those examples where, going from being just someone's peer to being in a position where you rightly or wrongly have an ability to influence what happens to them at work can be a sort of really quite sobering element of responsibility. And I think it's not something that is necessarily talked about that much, because a lot of people, when they think about getting promoted, when they think about getting positions of leadership or authority, they don't think about, well, actually, it really does weigh on someone if you're making a decision about someone whom you care about deeply, that they may be unhappy with, like how that's going to sit with you. So you just need to make sure that you are happy with the decision and that you would defend it.
I think that's one of the burdens of being a manager. And I actually haven't asked you, like, do you want to be friends with your reports as a manager?
Yeah, it depends. So if I know them already, yes, I would like for us to be friends in the way that I'm friends with anyone, right? if I don't know them and the first time I meet them is in the context of me being their coach or manager, I wouldn't expect that level of friendship to be as genuine, as sort of heartfelt and as natural as it would be otherwise, right?
Yeah.
Because it's that, you alluded to the whole idea of power dynamics earlier. You're starting off on an unequal footing, and therefore there's always going to be that element of, well, I can't compel someone to be friends with me. I can't compel someone to like me. So
also, you never know if they really want to be friends with you or are only forced to be.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's like company fun. It's like, do you really want to go to these work drinks? Like, oh God, I'm gonna have to go there and show my face or whatever. But no. And I've had this before where I've, as someone's coach or manager, I've invited them to like some drinks I was having or whatever, and had taken care to say to them, you really, really don't have to come to this. Like, I'm not expecting you to come to this. So,
it's not related to your performance rating.
No, exactly. But how about you? I mean, would you share that opinion? I mean, do you?
I mean,
because there's something inherently different about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've said that in the beginning. I did want to be friends with everyone, and I think now I've kind of grown and see the downsides of trying to be friends with the team. So, and also I said, like, because our relationship worked out so well, I expected all of the other relationships to be similar, and I quickly learned that they were not. Like, each relationship is different, and I think it's also, how much you click with the person. So I think it's very case by case. So are you first, like, is that person good at their job? So that, I think, it's like the big caveat that changes the whole conversation. Because once that's out of the way, then you can be like, okay, well, maybe there's like, we can build on the relationship and there's more space for growing a friendship. But if not, then the conversation is more, I think it stays more professional. And sometimes that's not a bad thing. You don't have to be friends with everyone, and you shouldn't try to be liked by everyone, but I'm still working on it.
No, I think that's really true. And one thing that I've noticed that you do as well is even when you're delivering like a challenging message to someone or whatever, like, you're doing it in a very human and humane way, but not necessarily trying to make everything super friendly all the time, right? Because I think I've seen like examples of that. So I have like other managers that have shown me that actually you can be both empathetic and understanding and still like hold up your boundaries and set standards. So I think because I've seen that demonstrated to me, then I try to kind of adopt my own, like kind of find my own way. At some point I thought, I'd either have to be myself, which is like very friendly and want to be friends and liked by everyone, or like this like cold-blooded, like cutthroat mercenary type of leader, and that's how you succeed in corporate world and how you climb up the ladder. And then quickly, I realized that was just a false dichotomy, and I can and I should find my own way, which is kind of in the middle of being both like still true to myself and human, but also, you need to set some boundaries. And on that topic of boundaries, I think one thing that you and I have been working through together is this whole idea of like, because you give a lot of yourself personally to your job, both in terms of like your ideas, your passions and stuff, but also your sort of personal like branding too, right? It's very much something that you give to the company. And this is one thing that you and I haven't always agreed on, right? Is the extent to which you should give so much of your personality to your job. Like, should you have a docuseries that's actually in your apartment and like, it's like almost divulging too much. And that question we were talking about earlier, which is, should you expect to be genuine friends as well with the people you're managing, or also with your managers, right? It comes back to, for me, an element of like, how much of yourself do you give to your job? Like, there should always be a part of you, and a really big part of you, like the majority of you, should be locked well away from being able to be touched by what happens with your job, right? Unless something is truly your passion and you want to give your whole self to it, right? Just for like personal survival, Yeah,
I think that's the part where we disagree a little bit on. It's not that my work is my life and I give everything to it and I don't want to separate my personal life from my work. It's more like, because we spend so much time at work, we spend so much time with the people around that we work with in the team, that I want it to be a nice environment where I truly enjoy and I can be myself and I can be transparent and I can, so I think, well, there's a degree of like being yourself and enjoying the company, and also sometimes having like no filter at all when there should be. So I think there is obviously a degree of that that we can adjust.
Yeah.
But I just thought it's nicer, because we're spending like 10 hours together, then we might as well be more, you know each other, their family, you have an actual relationship with that person, so it's less transactional. It's what I want.
But I can see where you're coming from for sure. I guess like one thing I've been thinking about a lot is, especially in the context of like remote work and the way things have changed since like since COVID or whatever, is kind of like the exploding of boundaries between someone's personal and working life. And I think there's a sort of one school of thought of like traditional management / like being an employee or an employer. There used to be a really sort of clear definition between what was expected of you in your personal life and your professional life. And I feel like there's this sort of blurring, if not exploding of that.
Yeah.
And I think especially in marketing where, a lot of your personal brand comes into like how good you are at your job. Like, for example, you're on LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn. Are we saying things as an employee of the company we're working for? Or are we saying them as ourselves? Like it's, and that I think is kind of emblematic of a lot of the struggles in being a modern day coach, like being a coach in a modern work environment, which is how much of this is what you think as Tom, how much of this is what you think as like a coach for this company,
Yeah, it's definitely tricky.
Yeah.
So now let's get into some rapid fire questions.
Great.
So are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Are good bosses born or made?
Yeah, I think made for sure. I think, you become a good, or in my case, hopefully like, more than mediocre boss. I think mostly from trial and error when you start, like when you sort of get your first roles and see things that you would probably try to avoid yourself when you get into a position of leadership, right? And I think it's mostly like sanding off the edges, really. Yeah.
If given the choice, would you prefer to be a manager or an individual contributor? I see.
I would try and have it both ways. I think I prefer to be a manager, but also retain some individual contributor tasks.
Right.
So I think just exclusively managing is no good for me. Yeah.
What's one myth about being a boss that you want to debunk?
The myth is that you need to be an expert in every technical area for which your team is responsible. Being, I think, a good coach or a good manager is really knowing like how to delegate or commission tasks, how to understand what other people are capable of and what they aren't capable of, and then sort of mapping that out to give yourself a really decent idea of what your team is capable of.
Especially nowadays where we're like, you should hire someone better than you to do what you can't do. To grow your team's potential, basically. If you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of management advice, what would it be?
Yeah, so I would say to have the tough conversations as early as possible, because they only get harder the longer you put them off. I've had a few situations where because it was going to be an unpleasant conversation, I shied away from or sort of minimized or found other ways to fix a problem. For example, I don't want to make myself sound like a hero, but I did have a few situations where someone wasn't pulling their weight, and rather than tell them to do it or make it another decision, like to cut them, I sort of put in more of my own time to account for that. And that's no good. Like that's a really crappy thing to do, and it's only letting things like fester.
It's really hard because I've been there myself, and you feel like there's always this question in your mind. I think when someone is not performing, did I do enough to help them? Am I supporting them enough? Are they not performing because they're not good, or is it because I didn't do my job as a manager? And so while you have those questions in your mind, you're always giving them the benefit of the doubt if you're like a more empathetic type of manager, and you try to make things right, and you also kind of want to delay the conversation with your own
Yeah,
manager about how good or bad your direct report is. And so to buy time, you just try to do this work yourself.
And that's it. And I think part of the responsibility of coaching and managing people is to try and sort of grow their resilience, right? And you do that by actually having challenging conversation, like occasionally challenging conversations with them. I mean, if someone doesn't understand that there's a problem with the work they're doing or the way they're performing or whatever, that like they need to know. And this is one thing that when I first started managing people, you know, I did just choose the path of least resistance and least fuss a lot of the time, because I'm from a country where people tend to abhor fuss, and just sort of get on and do it and find a way where no feathers are ruffled and everyone's happy, and you know, but it's no good. Sometimes you have to make people a little bit unhappy. Yeah.
Do you have any book or resources that, you know, had a significant impact on your management approach?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's any particular book or resource, but again, it's just there's sort of like a group of managers that I had when I was starting out in my first roles that I always think about, like, okay, how would this person have handled this situation? Yeah, I mean that's the best resource, I think. I don't really place a lot of stock in management texts. I think it's a bit of a snake oil industry sometimes, but yeah.
Not like we wrote a book recently.
No, of course, unless, Joey, you're talking about Collaborative Learning, the great new book written by Nick Hernandez. That's as far away from snake oil as you can get.
Okay, in one sentence, what does being a good boss mean to you? So
I would say being a good boss means naming and then killing as much ambiguity as you can. So I think this is, you know, there's always ambiguity in every job. You know, you don't know exactly what this person's looking for, exactly how this is going to work. But I think as a manager, it's making things more concrete rather than less concrete. So I don't know if you would agree with that. You know, we both work in marketing, which is inherently there's a level of ambiguity baked in, right? So yeah, I
think that's a good one. I also think that my tolerance for ambiguity is slightly higher than yours.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah,
I've noticed that, you know, ambiguity ticks you off. So yeah, I think it's like knowing your team and knowing what they need. Yeah. And last bonus question that's only for this episode is, can you be friends with your boss?
Sure.
What's the verdict?
I think it's a yes, but, right? I think yes, but you have to recognize that it's not a dynamic it's not a typical friendship dynamic. It's not a typical working dynamic. And if you want to not be friends with your boss, that's fine. If you want to be friends with someone and never work with them at all, that's also fine. I think there's all kinds of combinations out there, right?
Well, that was super fun. Thank you, Tom, for coming.
Thanks so much. And once again, you know, thanks for hiring me. You know, it's been a great time.
It honestly felt like Tom and I could have continued chatting for hours, and I really hope it was fun for anyone who's listening in too. If you've got any feedback or similar stories about being friends with your boss or direct reports, leave me a message on my Substack or connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you enjoyed this episode and want to support this podcast, share it with someone who might enjoy it. Subscribe, leave a review. It makes a huge difference and means the world to me. Until next time, bye!